All right, let's turn now to some politics. Every Monday, we take a look at what your elected officials are up to, and today we're starting in Iowa. Here to help break things down for us is Dana Searles of our sister station, WOI in Des Moines. All right, Dana, I wanted to talk to you about a bill that we discussed a little bit last week, but has been advancing in a House committee and subcommittee. It all has to do with civil rights. Last year, Iowa became the first state in the nation to remove gender protection from the state's civil rights code, and now the state wants to take it a step further and enact that upon local cities and townships. So what's going on here?
This bill basically just puts a blanket statement saying everybody, no city can implement their own protections. Now, Iowa lawmakers are saying they introduced this bill to make sure that we don't have gaps in where these policies are, making sure that there's no confusion in what city you are and what the rule is and what is protected. However, those against this bill are saying that this would take away from local control. We've seen cities like Coralville, Iowa City, Ames passing ordinance like this to protect gender identity as a protected civil right. So yeah, we talked about it in the early stages last week. Now that has since moved on through the committee, through a subcommittee, and is eligible for debate on a House floor.
Of course, lawmakers that are in favor of this also say that passing this bill would help other legislation that Iowa lawmakers have already passed. That includes banning transgender kids from receiving gender-affirming medical care or competing in sports. If this bill were to pass, getting those laws through would be a lot easier on the court side of things. But along the same lines, another bill is advancing right now through the House, and it would exempt LGBTQ conversion therapy from the definition of child abuse. Conversion therapy, of course, has been widely scientifically discredited. It's often linked to increased rates of depression, anxiety, even homelessness and suicide. So what does all of this have to do with kids in foster care?
Yeah, so what this bill says in the language in the bill is specifically, quote, it allows a person to raise a child in a manner consistent with the child's sex. So you kind of dive deeper into that. So that's kind of the baseline line that this bill does say. However, what it really is doing is it's trying to protect foster care parents. So it would allow parents to essentially misgender children and allows them to decline to seek gender affirming care. So it would say that any parent will not be punished, any foster parent specifically will not be punished if they decline any gender affirming care for their child or refer to their child's sex that is consistent with their biological sex. So like you mentioned, also takes LGBTQ conversion therapy from the definition of child abuse. So kind of the overall theme of this law is to protect those foster parents. Now, representatives introduce this say that, this is going to protect those parents from being investigated and punished for raising a child consistent with their biological sex. Others say, those against are saying this can just open a door for a lot of different things, taking that specific ideology out of a protection of child abuse. Clearly could, see some legal standing. We could see what could happen with this. But basically that bill is also eligible for debate on the House floor. So two major bills that brought a massive crowd to the Iowa State Legislature. Both of those moving forward to debate.
Well, another big bill that a lot of people are watching is all about abortion. As we speak, a House subcommittee will have a hearing coming up tomorrow on Tuesday, the 17th. For a bill that would really ban all abortions in the state of Iowa. It would also make performing an abortion punishable by life in prison for the doctor that performs it. So what have lawmakers said about this bill?
This would ban all abortions, period. It would just ban everything. Right now, Iowa's law says you can't have an abortion after a fetal heartbeat is detected, which is typically about 6 weeks. This bill goes to say, quote, the life of every human begins at conception. So that's kind of what this would put into action if it is ultimately passed and signed into law. Additionally, it would make it punishable up to life in prison for a doctor if they were to perform those abortions. But like you said, it is very much in the early stages, and it's important to note this is kind of going to be a crunch time week. We'll get into this in just a minute here. This is only a subcommittee. This is the first step on this bill. It's the public's opportunity to weigh in. House Speaker Pat Grassley even said it's still early, so he doesn't know what could happen here. Still a lot of undecided representatives. However, we do know a long list of Republican representatives who are bringing even just discussion about this. I think this is a big move, even just to have a discussion set about this.
Well, before I let you go, this week is the first funnel deadline of the 2026 legislative session. It will not be the last, but what does it mean for any bills that have to be passed?
So, to start the legislative session, we see hundreds, maybe even thousands of bills introduced. So this is essentially a way to weed out those bills that aren't going to ultimately make it through and be signed into law. So what must happen is all bills that are in subcommittee or committee must be passed through that committee by Friday or Thursday, because lawmakers don't typically gavel in on Fridays. So essentially, by the end of the day, Thursday, all bills must be passed out of committee. If those bills have not been passed, then those will no longer be eligible throughout the rest of the legislative session. Now, there are a few workarounds, I guess, to this. There is an unfinished business category that bills are able to go on. So if there is a bill that is in subcommittee or committee, lawmakers think, we want to revisit this later, but it's not, going to be passed this week, they can put that on that unfinished business list, revisit it later in the session. Another exception is for tax-related bills and spending bills. We've talked about property taxes being a major priority for Republicans this legislative session. That bill still can be introduced and still can be reworked and hold subcommittees and hearings, since that is a tax-related bill. However, it is important to note, this is a big week for lawmakers, because it kind of does show us what bills are going to get their footing throughout this legislative session. Because even if it is on that unfinished business list, that means it is a little bit more of a back burner, I guess if you could say, for lawmakers. So we'll have to see what bills make it out. This will be a good way to see kind of what lawmakers are focused on for the legislative session going forward.
Dana, thank you so much for your time today. We'll have to see what happens the rest of the week going into Thursday. But for right now, for you guys at home, we have our political coverage for both states up on our website. You can find the latest articles underneath the As Seen on TV tab at the top of the homepage.